I have started.
Hey, Schmiz, you want to turn down a bit?
I actually don't even know if it'd be a problem, honestly.
Sorry it took me so long. I've been playing Into the Breach even while we've been setting up.
And how timely, because this is Fancy Ramen, a podcast mostly about video games. It's March 4th, 2018, and this is episode 58. I'm Neil.
I'm Cookie.
And I'm Scott.
So, before you talk about Into the Breach, the latest game to come from the creators of FTL, what have you been doing this week?
Right now my abs are really hurting because yesterday I went rock climbing, or I guess I should say bouldering, for a good couple hours, and my body's paying for that full body workout. After
I'm familiar with bouldering.
I was about to say, you boulder?
Quite a while.
We've all played Breath of the Wild. I know what bouldering is. You're pushing boulders off cliffs.
You stasis it, and then you hit it with your most durable weapon, and then you ride it. That's what I was doing, and that's why your abs hurt. Is both the takeoff and the impact are very, it's a full body workout to hang on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great core workout. But bouldering for real. Mountain climbing.
Yeah. Not mountain climbing. This was at a indoor gym. Unfortunately, I'd love to do it outdoors, but it is still way too cold for me to be doing that outside.
And that was the most exciting thing from your week, or anything else?
That's a good question. I think that's probably the best thing I've done. I mean, I checked out a brewery in town as well the same day. I had a busy day yesterday. I went to the bank, realized that everybody around this town knows each other by name, which creeped me out. Because I'm all about that anonymity in the world. And then that's why my name is on a very popularly syndicated podcast. But besides
for all
that,
20 listeners out there.
Hey, man, that's not true. There's got to be more than that. What do our metrics say? 1 million? Am I guessing too low?
I don't trust the Simply or the WordPress podcasting extension I use. So.
Yeah.
But what is it lying about?
I don't know. I'm also curious if any Russian bots or hacker cells have started to use our comment section as their form of communication.
Oh, that would be interesting. Fancy Ramen Podcast, the #1 podcast for Russian bots and hackers.
Or at least are attempting to, because I have not gone through the trouble of disabling comments on the WordPress site, because the WordPress site is purely just like a feed for the podcast. That's all it really does at this point.
Right. I mean,
there are comments.
I don't know what else you'd really use it for.
There aren't comments to the public because I filter through all of the comments, which turn out to be spam. But
nice.
Yes. And it ranges from subtle to extremely obvious anti-Semitic literature to, what else have I seen? Oh, also just the run-of-the-mill, I love your content, but here, check this out so you can reach more people sort of spam that's directed directly at blogs. So, Cookie, what have you been up to this week?
Work. Just lots of extra work.
This is during your busy season right now, right? Or I shouldn't say season, but this is because of your acquisition that you're going to be just swamped this week and maybe next week.
Correct. And actually, yeah, today, about an hour ago, me and Lizzie sat down and watched FTL, a short movie.
Watched FTL?
A short movie on YouTube.
Is it based on the hit indie game?
The reason I clicked on it was because I thought it was, but it might still be. I'm not 100% sure, since I haven't seen the hit indie game.
Short film, English and French subtitles.
Yeah, that's the
about
one.
16 minutes long. Yeah, it doesn't look like it to me.
Only one person in the ship, not FTL.
What are you talking about? That's FTL after a couple of jumps for me.
The production value looks pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, it does.
It was about 5 minutes in that I realized it wasn't based on the indie video game.
The indie hit classic FTL.
Yep. So
Did you and Lizzie finish it at least?
yeah, we finished watching it.
That's good.
Yeah, it looks like it'd be good. I'm just making fun of one scene. It sounds like we're just ready to talk about video games. So
Oh, you didn't do anything at all?
I played
this week,
video games,
Neil?
and that's about it.
Oh, I was wondering if you're going to say something interesting. We'll hop right into it then. FTL is actually the perfect springboard into the game I'm going to talk about, which is Into the Breach.
It's like I planned that segue by watching the short film this morning.
You're too good to me. Thank you for doing my work for me and having the discipline to watch a 16-minute film.
And then effectively destroying the use of a segue by interrupting the transition.
But FTL, Faster and Light, was developed and produced by Subset Games, and their second project that they've released is Into the Breach, a isometric grid, turn-based mecha versus bug aliens strategy combat game. And it is wildly different mechanically from FTL. However, it has the same kind of charming pixel graphics that are reminiscent of FTL. And it also features the roguelike or sort of permadeath that FTL also had, where every run is ultimately going to end in your success or the death of your entire crew. And then you start from the beginning. Except the one twist to Into the Breach about death in the game is if you fail your objectives and you either allow your if you allow your power grid to go down and you fail that objective, you can carry one pilot that you have in your mechs over into your next game by stepping into the breach, which is like a rift that allows that single pilot to transport themselves into an alternate timeline to try again. So every time you fail, you've condemned that particular timeline to death and destruction by these alien Vec. But one guy gets out of it and he gets to try again and save a different timeline.
So does it address that? Is it a matter of like, does he go back in time and then you're able to correct that potential failure then? Or because I realize it's like you're going back in time as in restarting the game, right?
Right. And so to answer your question, he's not going back in time to... I imagine what the character is doing is going back to maybe a separate timeline completely as opposed to generating a new time point. Like, I think the best way to describe this in an audio format is instead of there being a forking path where you went down one path of the fork and then you fucked up really bad, so you go back to where that fork is at, and now let's say your success is then the other part of the fork. Instead, it seems more like you're jumping to a completely separate timeline that is in parallel with the one that you are in, but also slightly backward on it. Because the game utilizes randomized, missions and encounters on these 4 different corporate islands, as they call them, which all have different objectives and hazards, as well as different, what am I trying to think of? Also different environments as well. There's one that's like a sort of sandy desert, and its other features are rocks and limited water or large crevasses. While another one is mountains and forests and grass and trees with a greater abundance of water. There's an icy sort of island, and then there's another one that I haven't reached yet, so I can't comment on it, but I'm trying very hard to get to it. And when you're jumping back in this timeline, the island that you were at previously, if you select, say, let's say the most Earth-like island after failing at it previously, you'll find that the regions that you have the mission encounters in remain the same, but oftentimes the actual infrastructure there or what the mission is change every time you go. And so if I went to an area that I had just failed at on the Earth-like island previously that had a train station and I'm trying to protect the train and the buildings, this time it may have some satellite launch silos that I'd be protecting instead. So it's the same geographical location, but completely different outfit of buildings and objectives.
So the parallel universe aspect of it more or less justifies the existence of RNG and procedurally generated maps.
Yeah, for the most part. Except the one thing that doesn't change is the lady on the desert island is a bitch to me every single time, no matter how successful I am. She's just mean. She's this mean old woman who yells at me even when I'm successful.
Not successful enough, apparently.
I know. It's one of those things where I'm like, man, I want to find the timeline where you're not horrible to me and where I actually want to save this island. It's got the same type of flair and dialogue that FTL was. I thought FTL did a really good job with very little text, but that text being quite descriptive in what it does. In this game, your pilots will shout quips based upon what's happening in the game. And depending on how you clear certain objectives, the corporate leader of the island, who is the one giving you the missions, will also comment on what you've done, whether it's been like incredibly helpful, partially helpful, or you like got by just in the nick of time and they're pretty disappointed with how you handled things. And then people in the buildings will also have comments that they make before and end, at the beginning and end of a mission. So it's a lot of like fun, short little flavor text. And then instead of having different races and ships like FTL had, the two variables that you get to select for your character usage are the mech squads that you release, which you have to unlock with points that you earn from gaining achievements. So this game really does make you kind of hunt for achievements to have more things to do and utilize. And then the other one is the pilots. You get different pilots that have different abilities that transfer to the squad or the mech that they're piloting. And they're pretty entertaining as well. Each one of them has specific kind of like character and personality that comes out while you play them in the game and they give their quips. There's one guy who's this cheesy dude. I think his last name's Kwan. I can't remember his first name, but he's very cheesy and he reminds me of Neil a lot and I like to use him.
Because he's Chinese.
He might be Chinese. I don't know. I guess he's probably Asian. So there's that connection for you, Neil, if that's what you want. But it's more the like goofy comments than anything else.
How many hours do you think you're going to dump into it this next week?
Well, I put in 8 hours this week, and this was my more lax week than next week will be. I've also been busy at work, but probably not to the degree that Cookie has. But probably another 8 hours, maybe even more. I might play a lot today. This is a great game. It's probably actually going to overtake the number of hours I put into FTL because I like this grid-based strategy even more than the micromanagement that FTL had. What's really disappointing about this game is I'd have even more hours if it were available on Switch. I mean, it almost has the capacity to be like a mobile game that you could enjoy on a tablet too.
Have they talked about console releases or anything else?
Currently, it's only for PC that it's accessible or available, and the only thing that they've talked about is releasing a Linux and a Macintosh version. So I don't know if they'll get to that or not. Didn't FTL ultimately transition into being available for mobile devices? Or like, can you play it on your iPad? I don't actually know.
You can play it on iPad, and I'm assuming by extension iPhone. I don't think there's an Android port for it.
Yeah, so if FTL could have an app, I think it's absolutely accessible for Into the Breach to also get an app. And it is an exceptionally fun and I think deep game. And so if you were to buy it for, say, $10 on your mobile device, I think it would be a total steal. And this would be an absolute winner for the Nintendo Switch. Wanted to wait until I found out if it was being released for Switch, but I was just so curious and interested in the game that I bought it for computer. Figure if the time comes I can get it for a deal on the Switch, if it ever releases for it, then I'll probably pick it up there as well.
Cool.
I know. It's an awesome game. It's a wild ride. It's very difficult. I've been playing on easy mode for most of the game because I started on normal and I could not clear an island. And it seems like one of the games in which you really benefit from gathering a lot of the resources, like new pilots to use and new mechs by completing achievements in the easy mode, and then try those out once you get more comfortable and adept at using them on normal and hard.
Scott, have you played anything else this week?
That's been it, really. I've played some League with you, but I haven't touched any other games. Into the Breach has kept me, like, just any free moment I have, I've been putting into that game for right now.
Well, Cookie, what have you been playing this week?
Well, thus mentioning the Cookie's been having an extra busy week, so I've been doing 10 to 12 hour days last week, but as soon as I get home, I've been just jumping on more Monster Hunter. They've released the second half of the Horizon Zero Dawn event, so now my character now looks like Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, and I can honestly say that I'm not disappointed in this armor set. The Ryu armor set that first came out was just a low rank armor set, so by the time you were able to even get that armor set, it would have been completely useless to even wear because it's too weak. But now the Aloy, it's high rank, and she looks cool. And I got the Aloy bow. The mission wasn't all that difficult, and they also released a helmet called a Wriggly helmet, a Wiggler helmet. You're like this little snake creature that pops out of the ground and kind of, when you go to the aquariums and they got the little worm things that pop out of the ground and they all look in one direction and they kind of like sway with the ocean.
Yeah.
You pretty much have a helmet that's like that. And it's adorable because it looks like a Muppet because it's like shittily made, but it's just wonderful because your head will be like bobbing in the wind as you're running.
Is that also part of the crossover event?
Nope.
Okay.
It's just a random thing that they were like, you know what? This would be a really cute helmet. Let's make an event so people have to catch a bunch of these things. So then you could take a bunch of those things to the craftsman, and then he can make a helmet out of them. And he'll make it look like it and have googly eyes and everything. It's so wonderful. But yeah, so just been playing a whole lot of Monster Hunter. And I guess I should say over the weekend, I did go to Iowa, so I got the PlayStation VR back, which includes the PlayStation camera. So now I want to start, after everything gets unbusy, streaming for an hour a day of me going through a new playthrough of Monster Hunter World.
Are you planning on making it like educational as well? Kind of like talking about the game system and so forth as you go through?
Yeah.
See, what I was hoping was that you were going to say that because you had the PlayStation camera, you were now going to make use of it with NBA 2K18 and put your face in the game.
I have to get NBA 2K18 first.
Which I wouldn't recommend.
Yeah.
They seem like such cash grabs at this point.
Pretty much. But yeah, so now that I got my PlayStation camera back, I can finally start playing more. I do want to get into more PSVR games as well. I know you were mentioning something the other day.
Yeah, there was one particular game that looked interesting when it was announced, I think, last E3, and that was The Inpatient.
Oh yeah, that just came out
The
recently.
prequel for Until Dawn, and it takes place inside of the mental institute, the asylum or sanatorium that you explore in Until Dawn. But having seen most of it by this point, it doesn't seem nearly as clever or as well done as Until Dawn. It really seems more like a testing ground of what PSVR can do by that company, which is weird because the same company did Until Dawn Rush of Blood before. So like you could kind of see that as like the tech demo. And this one is maybe the more thought out implementation of how to get quote unquote Until Dawn style gameplay into a VR experience, or not Until Dawn specifically, but adventure game with that company's like approach. But it kind of fails spectacularly on a lot of different levels. And it's like a good effort. And I definitely think it's a scary game. But it kind of lit me down.
Sweet.
I'm trying to think of if there are any PSVR games at this point that really drew my attention, but like aside from the mouse game
that just came out, Mouse.
Yeah.
Moose.
Like I'm really curious as to what a well done like non VR perspective style game like that, since you're like technically you're seeing through the eyes of like this helper to the mouse, but
you're human size.
Yeah,
and the mouse
exactly.
is apparently mouse size. It's getting really good reviews.
So it's kind of like you're overlooking the situation as opposed to being in the mouse's shoes. And I think that's an interesting take, assuming you don't just start vomiting all over the place by forced camera movements and so forth. Like after you talked about the Red Threat one.
Red Watch.
Yeah, I've gotten way more curious about VR games, and I'm just starting to think that maybe we're at the point now where like the initial push by PlayStation VR or by PlayStation to get good games on the PSVR platform has started to dwindle out. Now we're actually starting to see better titles hit Oculus and HTC Vive.
It makes sense because right now PlayStation VR is just doing everything they can to get as many games as possible, because a lot of people have the PlayStation VR and don't have the room for the Oculus or the
room scale and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, so I almost bought, again, Super Hot just for the PSVR, though. But then I was like, wait a second. You've already got this.
And it'd probably be a lesser game, too, because you can't do full 360 with the PlayStation VR. You, in theory, can, but you really can't.
Yeah. I wonder if there was any moments where I would need full 360 on Super Hot VR. I'll have to play through it again. Anyway, yeah, just been playing a lot of Monster Hunter and got the PlayStation VR back, so I'll probably jumping into some more random VR games.
I'll take a look too and see if there's anything I'll pick up for you. Like if there's anything that I'd be curious about doing some content on.
I know the game something Speed Vector just came out that's getting good reviews.
Speed Vector. I take it it's a racer then, or
yes. Speed Vector VR.
Or Sprint Vector?
Yeah, Sprint Vector. Yeah. So that just came out and it's getting, from the few podcasts I listen to about video games, it's getting good reviews. It's got the full locomotion, not nausea-inducing apparently, even though it's just, go fast. Gotta go fast. So it's both on PSVR and like the Vive and the Rift.
The proper Sonic emulation or simulator that we've always been waiting for.
Pretty much. I may decide to pick that up. Who knows? So, you said you've been playing video games.
I have. It's unfortunate. I unfortunately don't have much to say. I've just been playing the quote unquote late game content of Breath of the Wild. So I've gotten all 4 Divine Beasts, and now I'm just basically going after shrines. Oh, actually, I do have something to say. The DLC content that they've added over the last, I think they added this particular expansion or pack of content 6 months after release, but it added more like backstory and cutscenes to each of the champions, along with like the gameplay mechanic reward of giving you either improved use of the 4 powers you get or lower cooldowns. And I feel like it's kind of shitty that these things are not shitty as in like it's an intentional I don't think it was intentional that they withheld this content, but it sucks that this content was not put into the game proper, because it's, aside from feeling maybe a little like slapped on or added on, like it doesn't feel as well put together or well paced as the rest of the gameplay and the story for that matter. It gives you a lot more insight to those 4 champions, and I think it helps better develop those characters. I think the story in that game is actually a lot better than I originally thought it was or was going to be. Yes, it feels kind of like it's very disconnected to the gameplay, but it is justified within the whole idea of you have amnesia and you have to go to these points on the map or look at these pictures to find more of the story out. But like after doing so, or after playing through the game and getting all the memories, it kind of occurred to me that they did a really good job of actually pushing the player to get certain memories first. Like the first memory that you would assumedly get is the last memory, or what you think is the last memory in your picture, in your memories picture album, I should say, because you
What
are.
memory was that?
So
Is that the one near the lake?
it's the one where you are at the gates of the Spring of Wisdom, or leading up to the Vanaru mountain range.
So, I got that one because I was in an area I shouldn't have been in.
Well, so
first,
they actually recommend you get it, or at least I am interpreting it this way. They recommend you get that memory first because as soon as you leave Impa's hut or house with the whole oh shit, now I need to go and find all of these memories, the painter, the traveling Sheikah painter, tells you about that if you talk to him, and he's usually, assuming it's day, right outside of the hut, right by the goddess statue.
He told me about it. I was just in an area I shouldn't have been in, wandering around aimlessly.
Well, it's really, really interesting how they've crafted these experiences, because immediately after that gate, you find a Lionel. I think it's a blue Lionel, and that Lionel will fuck you up if you're not prepared for it.
Hence why I was in an area I shouldn't have been in.
So it's almost like the game tells you to go to that gate, get that memory,
and then backtrack.
Yeah, backtrack or get killed and then reload and backtrack.
I did it the opposite way. So if I believe correctly, that gate, you go down the hill to meet the Lionel, down some stairs.
So
if you're walking up to where the memory is, which is on the, let's say, the green side of the gate, because on the other side you have Mount Lanairu in the background. You're walking up some ruins, and you're taking the incline to Mount Lanairu, and so going down to it, you'd be coming down the mountain, and you'd encounter the Lionel before the gate.
Yeah.
So I did it that way, by the way. So that's why I was wandering in places I shouldn't have been.
You snowboarded down the mountain, and then you're like, oh, what's this big lion thing?
And I was like, oh shit, run, keep running. Cutscene, what? Okay.
I'll probably have more to say about this once I finish the game this week, but I did kind of want to say that if you guys hadn't played the DLC, if you happen to own it from the season pass or something, then you should definitely go back and get those cutscenes, because it's definitely made me appreciate each of the champions, and Zelda more so, because these memories seem to relate more to Zelda and those champions as opposed to Link to those champions, which I think we haven't really talked about it much before, but I'm aware of a lot of the opinions that people put on the internet and Reddit and so forth about this particular Zelda, and I think a lot of them are unfounded, but we'll definitely get more into that next week if anyone's interested.
Are people hating on Zelda because she holds resentment for Link?
I think they're hating on her because her eyebrows are too thick.
I think they're hating on her because of that voice actress. No offense.
Yeah, that voice isn't the best. In fact, I feel like it might be the worst voice in the game. And not saying it's terrible, but I am saying
I'm saying it's terrible.
I think every other character is voiced or has a more appropriate voice actress or actor.
Yeah, like that the Rito champion, he has the voice of a douchebag.
And he's a douchebag. He's a dick.
It works perfect. Yeah.
I mean, just to quickly say, I imagine they intend for people to dislike him, right?
Yeah, he doesn't have any redeeming qualities in his relationship to Link, at least. He's straight up an adversarial rival. He doesn't like Link, and Link's character doesn't seem to acknowledge the fact that he doesn't like him, but we as the player know that.
The Rito character, he's the Falcon.
Bird, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he's Falcon from Fox's crew.
Oh yeah, basically.
Yeah, he's literally Falco.
But Falco's also, at least from what I remember from those games, one of the better pilots.
Dependable.
Yeah. Whereas this guy just goes into his mecha and dies, and it's like, oh well, I guess I have to bail you out 100 years later, you dick.
And he's still not thankful about it. Yeah.
Oh,
What can you do?
I see. I kind of envisioned him to be more of Gary from Pokemon. But Gary's actually a better trainer than Ash.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gary's better than Ash. He's cooler and more popular too. He has a sports car and he has women around him.
Like
Gary is
like a month later, he had
Gary's
a sports car and women.
yeah.
So I've got a question for you, Neil. You've been looking at a picture of the cover art of Detroit Become Human. What's going on there?
We'll talk about. This isn't really news, but we can talk about it real quick. The Quantic Dream showed the cover art for Detroit Become Human, and a lot of people rightfully think the cover is, not the best. It's a little cliche, yada yada. And there are better covers from Quantic Dream's backlog, for that matter, too. But this particular article from Polygon is bringing up a bunch of comparisons and fixes that people have done. One takes an Eminem, or a shot from Eminem's movie. What is that movie called?
8 Mile.
Yeah, and puts him in the cover art instead. There's also one where it has a side by side of Detroit Become Human's cover art and Shrek's cover art. That's my favorite so far.
I'm enjoying the new funky mode.
That's pretty good too. Anywho, before we talk about news, we had a special topic that Scott and I had come across when I was expressing my enjoyment and elation for Zelda Breath of the Wild, and that is Zelda music in general. What is your favorite soundtrack, guys, and why? And I guess before we begin, we realize that this is a super subjective thing. Favorite anything that is artistically driven. There's no real right answers, but let's throw that out the window for this. What's the best Zelda soundtrack?
So I got to hear both you and Scott's opinions, and while I didn't have one at that time, I decided to go out of my way to listen to the Zelda soundtracks on Spotify, or at least covers of the Zelda soundtracks on Spotify, because unfortunately they don't have the original OSTs.
Covers.
Yeah, the covers I'm curious about.
So there were some good covers of some Zelda things and some bad covers.
But like every Zelda soundtrack, at least a majority of the Zelda soundtracks share like 10 of the same songs across them. So arguing which Zelda soundtrack is the best is really becomes like an argument of which arrangement is the best. And so covers don't accurately portray what the ocarina or what the Hylian lullaby or like Zelda's theme, like what Zelda's theme is in any specific game, right? Because it's a cover.
Well, it's a cover of a specific arrangement, though. Because like I've heard Zelda's theme from a cover of A Link's Awakening. I don't remember which one.
You could have a cover of Ocarina of Time's Zelda theme, which is called like the Royal Lullaby or whatever the shit, and it's just done with better orchestrated instruments. But like ultimately, that is more or less the same thing as the Zelda's theme from like Twilight Princess.
I decided to stick with just piano covers. So I actually set a parameter for myself. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to listen to a cover by this person, listen to a cover by this person.
My like, you can't see it, but there's an aneurysm growing in my brain right now.
He's giving me the default Tiff face.
I want to say default. That's like I just heard something stupid face.
Sorry.
Isn't that the default Tiff face?
That is the
No.
But no, so I set my parameters for that because, like I said, didn't have access to the internet for like downloading OSTs on my phone while I was at work.
You can YouTube like soundtracks.
But then I'd have to keep the YouTube open. And
okay,
who wants
so
to do that?
You've qualified us by telling us that you are like unqualified for this argument. So what is your answer?
I'm still going Ocarina of Time for myself.
Okay. That's the first game that has Song of Storms. That's a super.
That's a good song.
And like, granted, again, when we were talking about this before, we shouldn't say like an album's better because it first introduced a song.
Absolutely, yeah. We did play that ground rule at least, that because Zelda is almost always going to have like thematic callbacks or just different arrangements of songs that are integral at this point to the game or the storyline, that just because it comes first does not give it any what would you say, like that's not any sort of heightened status from it being remastered later.
Exactly. Not every game has Song of Storms, so that's still a good choice. Ocarina has a lot of good tracks.
And the reason I chose Ocarina, unfortunately, is because it held the most member berries for me. So I've got the most memories with the particular song. So there's a lot of weight to the song. More weight to the songs, as if like giving them a dry run, like I did with Wind Waker, A Link to the Past, and I didn't actually go back and listen to any of
Original Zelda.
Yeah, Original Zelda are the newest one that came out. I just forgot what it was called. Breath of the Wild.
Cookie's Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. The one aptly named after me. I completely forgot what it was called.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to go on a I'm going to go on a tangent. So Scott, I'm going to let you go next.
No, I want to hear your tangent, please. There's a reason that we got into a big discussion about this.
Okay, so I started to think...
I'll cut you off if your tangent gets crazy.
I started to think about aesthetics in general when it came to graphics and music, for that matter. And part of me like realizes that pixel art is shitty, but it's the fact that I began playing video games when pixel art was the best art that was being done at that time. That I've
at least electric, like
yes. Sorry, within video games, I should add.
Neil saw the Mona Lisa and was like, unimpressed.
What the fuck is?
Show me this in 16-bit.
I mean, I would still argue that maybe the Mona Lisa is maybe like one of the most overhyped paintings.
Have you seen Starry
Agreed.
Night?
Impressionist era, baby.
Starry Night is awesome.
Have you seen Starry Night in person?
No.
Yeah, don't.
Wait,
Don't.
really? It's bad?
Don't.
Okay.
It's like, you see this box?
As you point to a cardboard box for our listeners?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
You see this? You see the size of this box? How would you measure this box? Ignoring the 13 by 6 by 5.5. Now just make it about this big.
Ignoring the dimensions.
So you're saying Starry Night is a
tiny.
small...
It's
a
tiny
the
painting.
Mona Lisa is also a pretty
tiny,
small
tiny painting.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's the downside. I thought you were insinuating more like the brush strokes as you got closer to the painting were not great.
They're not that impressive.
Okay.
It's kind of like going to see that one dude who paints the white paintings in person. Like his paintings in person.
Did he do the Beatles cover art for the White Album?
No. Unfortunately not. Too many colors in that on that album for his taste.
Okay, so
either way, art is subjective.
Like,
boo.
I would say that pixel art in general looks better current days when we embrace it or pair it with things that are thematically appropriate with pixel art.
You wouldn't put an orchestral string track over a pixel art
before we
game.
jump to music, like I would say Secret of Mana, since that's kind of topical, looked awesome as a Super Nintendo game, but that in that era. But when we think about a game that is all about traveling around a globe and seeing all of these different locations in different tundras and climates, completely different landscapes, if we were going to make that game today, we would not want to use pixel art. Like, we would want to use either, if we stuck with 2D, like watercolor painted backgrounds, or like, you know, as fucking Witcher as we can get with our backgrounds. Or, yeah, I mean, Breath of the Wild, for that matter, too, looks pretty good as well. If you were to look at Hyper Light Drifter, that game does not suffer from being pixel-based because the pixel identity of that game is what makes it look so fucking snazzy.
Yeah.
Now, when we think about music, I would say that maybe the analog here is that music that was designed to be orchestrated or sound like it was orchestrated, made in the 16-bit era and the early 32-bit era, doesn't translate as well by age. Now, we'll have nostalgia for like Ocarina of Time is actually a great example. That album, if you were to just show someone today that had no video game knowledge, they like before they read into the actual writing, like the composition, they would listen to it and be like, what the fuck Yamaha keyboard was this recorded on?
Unless they listen to the
orchestra doing it.
There is one thing I'll shout out, and that's the ZREO arrangements for Legend of Zelda. I don't know if you've heard
That is
those.
not a game soundtrack. We're talking about OSTs.
Okay. I just thought I'd point that out for any listeners that are at this point pretty enthralled about our discussion about music, and how I agree with your point that voices that are trying to replicate what we later can just have as the voice of an actual played instrument due to technology limitations are unfortunately normally going to pale in like impressiveness or comparison to later audio tracks that do the same thing with a better voice and or legitimate recording.
And with that in mind, I'm going to also say that the other side of my argument stems purely from the fact that, like, if we let nostalgia factor in too much, we lose the artistic value or like what the true artistic value of an album is, right? And granted,
Absolutely.
a video game soundtrack relies entirely on how it relates to the game itself and the story beats of that game. So you kind of have to keep, or I'm trying to keep into consideration, like, how much things touched me when I played that game and how much things, like how the music felt at that moment in time, even though that's going to be super flawed because there's no way I can go back to, 21-year-old Neil or 15-year-old Neil. Although, funny enough, since I only actually beat Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Wind Waker within the last 2 years, it's way more topical for me, or at least in my position, I'm able to analyze this more.
Yeah, you only have to go back to 42-year-old.
So I guess ultimately, like, those were the big ground rules I set for myself as I was going through the albums. And maybe I'm setting these ground rules up because I want to say specifically that Breath of the Wild is by far the best Zelda album we've had.
And so here's where I cut you off, right? This is, I said, this is the point where I cut
Hold on,
you
I'm
off.
going to let you finish.
I know. No, go right ahead. I just did want to hop in and say that the rule set that you tried to define for yourself is pretty much the exact same thing I did for myself. I know we left it pretty open on how we wanted to interpret this discussion. I wouldn't say necessarily argument, but I tried to follow pretty much the exact same premises without any other real adjustments to it. And now I'd love to hear your opinion on why Breath of the Wild is your number one.
So Breath of the Wild does a few things that I think no other Zelda soundtrack does. The first one is that it starts to bring out like an importance of subtlety within its music. Like a lot of that game is you running around collecting rushrooms. Rushrooms? I think those are the ones that you have to get.
Those are the purple ones off of cliff faces.
Yes, because we all have to get those 50 rushrooms for that jackass. And during those parts, the music is is subtle in a way that if you're not paying attention, you can kind of just ignore it entirely. And I think that's actually a strength only because when the music needs to be apparent and totally obvious and like the driving force of your emotions within cutscenes, it's very capable of doing that. Which also brings up the point that, like, I don't think I've ever had a Miyazaki or Studio Ghibli moment in a video game where like the soundtrack alone just starts to push me into the brink of tears. Not really tears, but starts to push me so far into one direction of like the emotion spectrum that even subpar writing or subpar voice acting cannot ruin the moment for me.
I think also one thing that you could note, and I don't know why I'm helping you with your points here, but because there are definite themes for certain activities that can happen in the large and open world of Breath of the Wild, having a very sparse soundtrack also allows for very fluid and easy transition. As soon as you're targeted by a guardian or you hop on your horse, you don't have nearly the same jarring effect as transitioning from one area to another like many other games have. Those themes instead just hop right into the empty space that the track had previously.
There are also a lot of really nice quality of life features we can say with the soundtrack too. Like there are night and day themes of each city. Tarrytown in particular, Tarrytown has even has multiple themes based on the development of the city. And shit, man, just I don't know if you guys have listened to the individual songs, like the town songs, like the Korok Forest song.
That's the best song. I love that.
There are just so many super catchy songs. Like I only saw Howl's Moving Castle when I was like 25 or 26, so not that long ago. The main theme of that particular movie, just like even if you've never seen it before, or at least in my case, just made me feel this weird sense of familiarity that I think has a lot to do based on the arrangement of the Miyazaki films. And I like this kind of gets into that nostalgia thing for a bit, but I would almost yield it's less about that particular studio, but more about classical arrangement in general and what we humans find appealing or soothing with like well-composed string sections.
Mm-hmm.
That level of quality with the arrangement, I don't think has been done in a Zelda game before. And then the rest of my argument is basically subjective preferences to the songs. The soundtrack is also really long too, so they have the benefit of having a lot of the old themes, which
I mean, Skyward Sword is also like 6 hours in length for its soundtrack.
Which that's the one album I haven't heard yet.
I used to listen to that quite a bit in college when I was doing homework and other stuff. I listened to quite a few Zelda soundtracks when I was trying to get work done in my later years in college. And it's okay, but I actually don't think it's that strong of a soundtrack. Though I did want to throw in a single shout out for that game because the Bazzer in that game has multiple themes depending on who you're talking to. And that was the coolest implementation of music in a game that I had encountered at that point in time in my life. So I did want to note that. And that probably my favorite soundtrack is actually not even the one that I think is the best, but the one that I had a really hard time both dissociating nostalgia, but also my personal preferences for traditionally more upbeat or up-tempo music was Wind Waker. So I just wanted to toss those out there since we're talking about music and the things that we like. But enter Twilight Princess, my least favorite Zelda game, because I've never played Zelda 2. And yet, I have to say, this is probably the best soundtrack I've encountered in all of the games. There's certainly, I think, a very high quality of the instruments and voices used for Breath of the Wild. But sometimes I find the vastness of space in the main like field themes for Breath of the Wild to be pretty lacking. I see a lot of really cool technical work too done with the like Guardian soundtracks and whatnot. But ultimately, when I went back and listened through most of the Twilight Princess soundtrack, which is of similar length to both Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, I found that there were a lot of things that were implemented effectively for the very first time in that soundtrack, and that's what made it really stand out to me is not only probably the best I've heard, but also like a very effective step towards the better music that we heard in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. We get to hear a very large orchestral group, really for the second time. I think before that, the only other large orchestral pieces were happening in Wind Waker, and previous to that, the limitation of the hardware prevented you from having too many voices on a single track. However, not only do we have more instruments and a much greater diversity coming in to a lot of the tracks in this game, there is also a huge amount of more like vocal voices that are added to the music in this game, which was really cool because previous to that, I had only experienced most of the voices in Legend of Zelda tracks to be that like lower Gregorian chant in pitch. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, in those like baritone and even bass ranges, tenor at best, but you hear a lot more of like a alto soprano range available in the voices that they add to these. And I thought that added a huge amount of depth to a lot of these tracks. I also wanted to note too that do you know who composed Breath of the Wild, because it was not the same as previous Zelda games?
No, I did not, but I actually kept myself blinds because I felt that like knowing Joe Hisaishi was the piano performer was already like I felt like that was already swaying my opinion.
Gotcha. So I did want to note that Koji Kondo I actually didn't check to see if Koji Kondo did Skyward Sword, but I know Koji Kondo worked pretty much exclusively on the Zelda games up until Twilight Princess, and then maybe he did Skyward Sword as well. I'm not certain. But the composer for Breath of the Wild was Manaka Kataoka. I'm really butchering this, and I'm sorry about it. And this is actually her first Legend of Zelda soundtrack that she's done in entirety. The other games she's worked on are like Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U and Animal Crossing. Oh, she did do Spirit Tracks for Legend of Zelda. So
the game no one played.
Yeah, I never played that one, sadly. But I'm really excited to see what she has in her future because I think Breath of the Wild is an incredibly strong soundtrack. I just found that there were a lot of areas in which I saw the Twilight Princess soundtrack did things that were new and different with the arrangement of previous themes and added a lot more like substance and flesh to these tracks. They had a very grand scale to many things that they did, but like you were saying that sometimes less is more. A lot of the dungeon themes and whatnot were very expansive, and besides having a pretty low-key like percussion section, there was not much more to some of the more disparate tracks for dungeons, and it made sense for the spaces that they were trying to give that vibe to. The probably last thing is that I think also it's the first time I remember encountering a Zelda game that had a lot more dissonance in some of the tracks, especially anything that was representing the Twilight characters or region. We were often encountering sounds that were more traditionally electronic, a lot more buzzing, and when we did have strings and whatnot, they were meant to create like these dissonant sounds that are not necessarily pleasing to any ear. And so I just really liked this soundtrack in its entirety for it encompassing so many things and like sticking the landing on most compositions while having the greatest diversity between track to track to track. And Breath of the Wild seemed more isolated. Like, I feel as though, and I don't actually want to like give too many negative comments towards Breath of the Wild because I think it's one of the strongest soundtracks I've heard otherwise in the series, and it's also the one that you've heralded as your favorite, so I also want to like appreciate that opinion. But the reason that I couldn't pick or agree to Breath of the Wild for this is because I can think of several strong tracks in Breath of the Wild, but the other issue I encountered is that they weren't as accessible through the game. You're traveling in the main space, and so that overworld Hyrule theme in the day and night are the primary track you hear, and there just is not there's not enough substance to it for it to be memorable whatsoever.
You hear a lot of the minimalistic like Joe Hisaishi piano. Like that is
and the
the
piano
real
in that
theme
game
of that
is
game.
amazing. And that was the other thing I wanted to nod to, is that if you listen to the Guardian theme closely, like the piano in it is wild. It's so impressive. I can't even imagine how you can play it. But yeah, that's how I came to the determination that Twilight Princess is the most aggressively unique soundtrack, and yet still wonderful with everything that it rearranges from previous games and works.
Yeah, I respect that opinion. Twilight Princess is probably my second or third favorite album from Zelda.
Yeah, and I hated that game, so I also felt like it passed my bias test too.
So I'm curious, when you say that, how did you feel about the story in Twilight Princess?
I actually liked the story in Twilight Princess. The gameplay itself was not a blast for me. Like, I just felt part of it absolutely is I played that game when I was younger and it was a rented game. And so I had rushed through a lot of it, and maybe if I had spent more time with it, my opinion would be different.
So what I don't get is that a lot of people that want Zelda to be more of a linear experience seem to forget that, or I mean, maybe these are the same people that also really like Twilight Princess, the gameplay of Twilight Princess.
It is very linear. It's one of the most linear games I've played in the Zelda series.
It might be the most linear, actually. I'm trying to think if Ocarina would also, like, because Ocarina is actually fairly linear as well.
Ocarina, I can make the argument that you can finish the fire temple before the forest temple, and that really causes like an opportunity for a break in the linearity.
That alone makes it less linear, I guess. Yeah,
because Twilight Princess, you have to complete everything in the order that it's presented to you.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a strong narrative, but as far as a game that's, heralded very much for player exploration, it doesn't have those strengths as much.
I guess the only thing I've really feel the need to say is that, like, it sucks going back to some of those old soundtracks and realizing that they just don't age as well. And I'm trying to be impartial here, but when and accept the fact that there are limitations based on the hardware, but it's weird to think that Ocarina of Time came out after Final Fantasy VII and not long before Final Fantasy VIII. And those soundtracks, like, there are some individual songs from Final Fantasy VII in particular that sound like garbage now, and they are songs that people would say are like their favorites. Like, we're talking God, I'm forgetting names now. Like that song actually still sounds pretty okay. Like, there are definitely some cheesy sounding voices in it, but like that's a pretty good example of like how surprisingly good a PlayStation 1 can sound. And Final Fantasy VIII as a whole, like, that soundtrack actually is pretty well produced. Like, aside from Laguna's theme, but that theme is also meant to sound like some crazy ass disco battle theme music anyways. So, God, I kind of want to go back and play those games now.
No, you don't.
Yeah, no, you're right. I don't want to play Final Fantasy VII, but I kind of want to play Final Fantasy VIII. Let's talk about some news, though. So, guys, the day has finally come that it is no longer off topic to talk about Trump. On March 1st, Trump stated he would be meeting with figures from the video game industry to discuss violence in video games. That said, the Entertainment Software Association, a lobbyist group representing the interests of the video game industry, also known as the ESA, stated that they had not received any communication or invitation from Trump pertaining to a meeting.
Because he wasn't planning on meeting with them.
But he did want to tell people he was.
Yeah, he was probably just going to go to some crazy indie developer that he knows who lives next door to him.
He's going to go talk to Peter Molyneux.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Oh my gosh, that would be such a mess.
He's going to go talk to Palmer.
He's going to go talk to... that's actually probably true.
He's like, Palmer Luckey, I hear you invented video games. What do you think about violence in video games? Well, I make guns now.
Can I get out of this? Yeah, can I get out of this naked outfit first?
What about if you met up with David Cage and they could talk about being creepy old guys together? It's like, I once rendered Ellen Page's nipples in my video game. And Trump's like, you're doing good work. I've talked to the greatest video game makers of all time, and we've come to a conclusion.
ban the video games, ban the Muslims.
And that conclusion is the Chrono Trigger PC port apparently sucks ass.
That's so sad.
That is sad.
Yep. It kind of came without any sort of fanfare or like lead up. Just last week, Chrono Trigger suddenly on Steam. And it is apparently a port of their mobile version, which at first I thought was potentially a good thing because the mobile version took the extra dungeons from the DS release of Chrono Trigger. And then, it turned out to be kind of shitty for reasons we don't necessarily have to go into here. I will say, I feel like of every video game franchise, Chrono Trigger fans probably have it the worst at this point.
Was the DS release any good? I didn't get to play that. My experience with Chrono Trigger, very sadly, was like just a ROM that I played in college.
I mean, at this point, that's the best way to play it, aside from getting, a Super Nintendo cartridge of it.
I was about to say,
just
played a
but
ROM of it.
Yeah.
my ROM was glitchy enough where I couldn't combine key presses, and so when you have to save Luca's mother or father or whatever, when you have to save Luca's parents, you can't do the combined key presses, so you have to like lose that portion of the storyline.
Oh my god, we talked about this. I'm not saying it's bad that we already talked about this, but I'd forgotten we talked about this. There are no combined buttons. You just have to hit Lara. Lara.
It didn't work.
You
for
gotta
me, that's
save
all I'm
Lara.
saying.
Okay.
Maybe it wasn't combined buttons, but I feel like I had all the other button functionality, so I don't think LARA was the problem.
Like I don't think at any point in time do you ever have to use L and R. Like you can use one or the other for everything, because I think that's how you target multiple enemies, or that might be a Final Fantasy thing.
That's probably what happened then, is I didn't have functionality on one of those keys. Because I remember like trying to solve the problem and just being like, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to lose your legs. I think it's they lose their legs.
Yes, they do. Or like lose function to it or something. Because she's a character. She's just sitting in a chair all the time. And no one ever says anything until Luca has that dream. And then if you save her, she's moving again. She's standing upright.
Gotcha.
Nice.
Maybe it's not even that she loses her legs. It's just being in the accident causes her to have like
trauma,
some pain, some lower back pain. So it's unpleasant for her to stand up, like for long periods of time. So maybe you don't have to feel so bad about it. No, I think you probably fucked her. I'm sorry.
Way to go. So I received an email on March 1st stating that this was from Sony, stating that after March 8th, 2019, the monthly games provided to PlayStation Plus members will no longer include PS3 or PS Vita titles.
Pew, 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 pew. We need that air horn sound right in there.
Any PS3 or PS Vita monthly games downloaded or previously added to your download list will remain playable for as long as you remain a PlayStation Plus member. Basically what they're saying is, hey, we're finally killing the Vita.
No, like they've tried. They have been putting the dirt onto the Vita's body. Like
they've been trying, but then they've been like just releasing new free games for it.
Yes and yeah. Well, like okay, yeah. No, that is true. They have continued to show a support, like a sign of support.
They've been like half of Sony's been like, all right, Vita, you're dead. Pile of dirt. Yeah. Then the PlayStation Plus was like, wait a second.
I think you're misconstruing this, though. What they were actually doing was releasing games on quote unquote obsolete systems, like to them. So they weren't losing anything on potential sales or money. It's just we had the illusion of, wow, they're giving us 4 free games. Oh, 2 of those games really, like, no one even plays because everyone that has PlayStation Plus is playing on a PS4. Whoops. Oh, well.
Pretty much. So I've been kind of...
My bigger question is, are they going to move those titles that they would release in PlayStation Plus to PlayStation 4 at this point now?
I would imagine so, that they just take an Xbox thing on it, because now Xbox, since they're doing their games with gold every month, they've got 4 titles... usually 4 titles releasing just to the Xbox One. Nothing's releasing to the 360.
Yeah,
so I've just been like...
that's the right way to do it.
So I've been like, yeah, I'm kind of waiting for this. And I misread the email when I first got it and thought it said March 8th, 2018. So I was like, yes, finally. Especially considering that the PlayStation Plus games for March of 2018, even though there's one title that you cannot download for the PlayStation 4, it's a PlayStation 3 exclusive, a PlayStation 3 title. The other three, there's one PlayStation 4 game and two cross-buys. One's for Vita, one's for PlayStation 3. So technically, you're getting 3 games for the PlayStation 4. You know, life. I've just been waiting for the day that they finally said, yeah, no more.
Speaking of which, one of the games that came out this month or is coming out this month is Bloodborne.
Yep, that's actually down there in the farther down the list. And I know you guys
That's why I said it.
You guys have been talking about watching my wife play it. I think it's been you guys.
Have we talked about this? I mean, I think it's an interesting concept. I would love to see either of you play. I think you would do fine playing Bloodborne because, like, if you can play Monster Hunter like well, some of that carries over to Bloodborne, I think. But if your wife doesn't play these types of games too often, it might be a treat watching her go up against some of these bosses for the first time.
It's either been you two that have mentioned Bloodborne a few times about her playing it, and are her old coworkers.
Okay.
So either way, it can now happen.
I think I brought up Bloodborne for Lizzie, or at least Dark Souls in general.
Nope, there you go. It was Scott.
It's like, oh, you like the anime Kiss Him, Not Me? Then I got a game for you. So I did get Tiff to play Bloodborne for a while, and her biggest complaint was that going from games like Bayonetta or Nier Automata, like
she was too hack and slash happy.
Yeah, the inability to do animation cancels is like what kind of drove her away from that game. And it's interesting because Bloodborne is probably the fastest paced. Well,
Souls
actually,
type.
I haven't put in enough time into Dark Souls 3, but it's definitely faster than Dark
1 and
Souls 1
2.
and 2.
Bloodborne is as fast as Dark Souls 3, if not faster. Yeah, I'd say that Bloodborne still holds the title for being in the top fastest, even if it's a tied place.
And now I kind of want to play that game some more.
No, you don't.
I still haven't done the DLC for Bloodborne.
Neil, I still haven't beaten it, and I still haven't played the DLC either.
I haven't even played it.
If this were like 3 years ago, it would have been great to do like a Bloodborne Let's Play that like where we talked about the lore.
Blood Buddies? Oh yeah.
Blood Buddies.
Yeah. That would
Sounds
have been so much fun.
gross.
Yeah.
Sounds Sisterhood of the Traveling Pansy.
And in some not so topical news, Chucklefish's Stardew Valley inspired project Spellbound. This has been apparently a game or a title that's been circulating around for a bit. But their project Spellbound is a magic school RPG simulator that will have an emphasis on social life and lessons. Are you ready to play some Harry Potter the RPG?
I'm ready to play some Harry Potter the Doki Doki Life Experience.
You think there's going to be a Doki Doki twist?
I don't think there's going to be a Doki Doki twist, but I think it's going to be... I'm ready to play Harry Potter the light novel.
I think from what I was looking at, it seems like the gameplay itself is going to be kind of geared towards that top-down Zelda Link to the Past sort of feel, like spell use instead of swords, that sort of thing. And sorry, I should maybe make that clear. Chucklefish was the publisher for Stardew Valley. So, but because they were involved with Stardew Valley, people are making that link of like, you know, a Stardew Valley Harry Potter game, basically.
So where's our multiplayer Chucklefish?
Well, they're not involved in the direct development of Stardew Valley, but I'm assuming that is potentially in QA right now.
So that way we can finally play together, because that was the only reason I got that game.
Really?
Yeah.
But you knew I didn't have a Switch at that point in time, right?
But I knew you were going to get one.
Yeah, okay.
And you were raving too much about Stardew Valley not to own it for the Switch when it happened.
Have you not put that much time in it yet?
I've put fairly a decent amount of time in it, but the last time I talked about it was the last time I played it. So, you know, it's been years.
It's a good game. I think it's a great game. I think I have been waiting to play it for I've been waiting for multiplayer to come out to play any more of it too. So Like I am waiting for that day. I may very well just pick it up on the Switch just to see how that goes. But
There we go. Then we can be star buddies.
Star Buddies.
Or do buddies.
Blood buddies and do buddies. Do buddies sounds better. It also sounds like we drink Mountain Dew together.
Hey, Mountain Dew, let's do this.
And then the next thing I wanted to talk about was 2 trailers that came out for ReFantasy. And if you've forgotten, ReFantasy is the RPG project, or a fantasy-driven RPG project that Studio Zero is working on. Studio Zero being the big 3 from Persona 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to take a break so you guys can watch these 2 trailers, or these 2, I guess you could say, conceptual videos. And then I want to hear your reactions immediately after. Okay, guys, now that you've seen both of the Project ReFantasy trailers released in late 2017, what do you have to say?
Why?
That's some quality shit posting right there. I pulled up a video of Andy Warhol eating a hamburger after the Night with the Chicken one. And it's pretty much the same thing. It is the exact same type of video.
Yeah, I don't even
I'm
know.
speechless. This is bullshit. What is the point of this? I mean, I'm sure there's some art director who is either feeling very smug and like clever about what they're doing, or they're just like so without an idea on what to do to present the fact that they don't have anything else to show.
What I thought when I watched this was like, oh, they must have went on like a research trip to Europe and then had to make something to make it look like it wasn't just a vacation to, the studio heads, or not studio heads, but to their bosses.
They put a confused European man in knight's armor and make him eat really salty pigeon.
I mean, if their goal is to make us rethink what a fantasy RPG can be,
they've done it.
Yeah, maybe like instead of going to hang out with your classmates like you do in Persona, now you get to eat pigeon in the Middle Ages.
That was an overall uncomfortable experience.
Why?
It was real uncomfortable watching it at normal speed for the 5 minutes it takes, or 4.5 minutes it takes, or whatever.
Yeah,
especially when he gets the salt shaker, salt shaker. The salt
it won't
container.
come out.
It won't come out.
And then it just spills all over the pigeon.
And then he proceeds to continue eating it.
Oh, it's a shame that how this is going to pan out is we're going to have the break for our listeners to watch the video. And then
why?
They're going to come back and we're all going to complain about it together.
I'm excited for this game.
You should put a spoiler at the beginning of that. Like, hey, if you don't want your fucking time wasted, just go ahead and skip through the pause. That's all I have to say. I'm done recording. This has ruined my day.
And I'm Neil. Now,
why?
Before you go, do you have anything you're looking forward to, Scott?
Shit, playing a bunch more Into the Breach. My goals right now are to just unlock as many mech crews as possible, and then start playing the game with randomized squads or random. Like I want to randomize everything, and then I want to build a custom squad. Those are the 2 goals I have. Otherwise, for gaming, I'm not sure what else I'm going to be doing besides playing this game. It's too good. Got to get my time in.
Cookie?
Why? Why did you show me that? Okay.
Don't you kind of feel like pigeon right now?
I am kind of hungry, but that's not the point. I'm a little peckish. You
could peck away at that pigeon like that knight did.
Looking forward to some to a little more Monster Hunter. Now that I got the PlayStation VR back, like I said, I think I've got there's this arena-based shooter that you're floating out in the stars. That came out for free a few months ago for PlayStation Plus, and I ended up grabbing it, but I didn't have the PlayStation VR with me. So check out some PSVR games, see if they are just as bad as I remember them being.
I'm super curious. You'll have to tell me how bad the tracking feels compared to your HTC Vive now that you've only been playing the Vive and you go back to the PlayStation VR.
Most definitely. And I guess I'm also looking forward to dedicating an hour a day, probably around 9-ish, to streaming some Monster Hunter, starting over with a whole new character and
Educating some scrubs.
educating some scrubs.
Yeah. If you give me a link or something to that, I'll throw it onto the
Aren't you?
podcast as well.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, aren't you just auto-hosting me on the Twitch?
Yeah, but oh no, you can do Twitch off of the PlayStation 4, can't you? That's pretty cool.
So yeah, so I'm just gonna be doing it to there.
As for me, I'm looking forward to finishing Breath of the Wild finally. Like I say finally, but then at the same time, I'm also kind of sad that it's going to end soon, but I have to finish the game so I can play other games. I've uploaded a couple videos of Danganronpa's first chapter. We'll be finishing that trial today, and that's probably all we'll do for that. For today at least. Shit, I think that's about it. Those videos have been uploaded. They haven't been published. I wanted to get through the first chapter, and then we could start actually releasing them, so it's a little more regular. And then I think, yeah.
And then there were two.
Mm-hmm. Did he leave already?
No, I'm still here.
If you have questions or suggestions, you can write into podcast@fancyramen.com.
But the best way to help
If
us
you have comments, you're a Russian bot.
at that point, the best way to help us grow our audience besides, you know what? Scott, you go. Go, Scott. Do it.
All right, I got this. To all of you who are not Russian bots, I want you to spread your own information campaign about the Fancy Ramen podcast. The best way for us to get new listeners is for you guys to talk about us and how great this podcast is, or how entertained you are by how poor this podcast is. I don't really care as long as that listener count goes up. So please tell a friend, tell a family member, anybody you see walking on the street. We'd love to have more listeners, and we appreciate you listening and sharing the good word.
And apparently there's not enough people reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. So more people do that, so then that way we can actually start seeing the reviews, and then we can start reading those off. Someone will, eventually, one day. Once we can start...
Please, guys.
Once we can start seeing those.
Yeah, I don't want to download iTunes. I need other people to do reviews.
Oh, I'll be able to read the reviews. I've got an iPad where iTunes is just automatically there. There's no point not having iTunes on there. I don't think I can delete it.
Yeah, it's probably a required thing unless you somehow jailbreak it. You can run Linux on it.
But why?
Yeah, exactly. There are thousands upon thousands of people running Linux right now looking for that same answer. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Why?